The information in today's video came about because I was looking at the backgrounds of some of the characters involved in this impeachment inquiry. I looked at the politicians as well, but that's not for this video. In this video, I'm going to look at the witnesses, 3 of them. I'm going to look at Marie Yovanovitch very briefly. I'm going to look deeply at Alexander Vindman, and I'm going to touch on, at the end, Eric CIA Ramella. We're not allowed to say Eric CIA Ramella's name properly because there's some kind of crazy media blackout. They're calling him the whistleblower, and we're not supposed to name him. Adam Schiff refuses to name him. Adam Schiff, who is chairing the impeachment inquiry, who is basing his entire impeachment inquiry on this guy, the unnamed whistleblower, who everyone says is Eric CIA Ramella, but we cannot officially say it publicly. It's so bizarre. Now, it has come out. It's all over the place, as a matter of fact. But I know that YouTube will delete this video as they deleted In Pursuit of Truth, iPot, his excellent video about Eric CIA Ramella. They deleted it. I hope he's got it stored up somewhere. He might have it over on BitChute. And if you want to know all about Eric CIA Ramella's former jobs and education, go watch that. It's really good background. I'm not going to get into all of that. What I'm going to do is show you, well, things that I found while I was researching and things that have made me go, look, this corruption that we are facing is giant and it's generational. It's been going on a very long time. Very powerful organizations are involved that you wouldn't think would have similar interests to one another, but it turns out that they do. And those involve the CIA, the mafia, the Russian mafia, the Italian mafia, the Jewish mafia, which, okay, you might want to say doesn't officially exist, but I'm going to show you somebody who I think could be called a member of the Jewish mafia. Spies, double agents, the KGB, gambling, New Jersey, New York, Virginia, the Vindman's family, and a bunch of things. Just a bunch of things. Basically, here's a chart. Here's a graphic to get us going. This is what I'm going to touch on today. But by the end, the arrows and everything are just going to be overwhelming. And one more caveat before we begin. All of this came from me looking at Alexander Vindman, trying to find information on his family. And as I found little bits and pieces, things just got weirder. And when I tried to confirm or deny my suspicions about those weird little pieces of information, the trail went berserk, which is why it encompasses so many different things, including the mafia and the CIA at this point. Let's start by looking at Alexander Vindman in the New York Times, portraying him as kind of a hero, someone to be trusted. They talk about him and his twin brother coming over when they were 3 years old. It says they fled Ukraine, which was then a Soviet republic, with their father and grandmother, Jewish refugees, with only their suitcases and $750. Somehow he went on to be educated at Harvard, and he's now a lieutenant colonel in the Army. Here's him and his twin brother all grown up. They're both in the Army, as you can see. And I think they were both on the National Security Council. So they rose through the ranks. That might be because they were groomed to do exactly that. They also have another brother, Leonid, and we'll look at him in a little bit. But first, let's continue with the journey and the background of Alexander Vindman and his family. So this goes over, they were brought to the United States in 1979 by their father, Simon, grew up in Brooklyn's Little Odessa neighborhood. Vindman speaks fluent Russian and Ukrainian. His Harvard degree is in Russian, Eastern Europe, and Central Asian studies. What's interesting about this little blurb from Wikipedia is they don't mention at all that the Vindman family did not go straight from Ukraine to the United States. They took a detour and lived for a time in Italy. Not really sure how long, but here's confirmation of that. The Vindman, Soviet Union, and the twins say, "Our mother died, so we went to Italy." Nobody likes to bring that up. This is a Ken Burns PBS documentary that, surprise, the Vindman boys and their grandmother were in. was called The Statue of Liberty. Here's the credits. Ken Burns, it was a Ken Burns documentary, 1985. The film was The Statue of Liberty. This is their grandmother, Mrs. Kalmanovich. The Vindmans were not only stars of this PBS show, which one might ask, how did they come to the attention of Ken Burns? Out of all of these possible refugees and immigrants they could have looked at, they picked these guys. It might have had something to do with this woman, Carol Kitman. Carol Kitman calls herself a photographer. She has a website of her photography, which she is busily updating right now, so I don't think it looks like this anymore. When I went to get information last night, it had changed. But this is what it looked like before, and these are a bunch of the photos she has of the Vindman boys. Interestingly, even though she says that she went there every weekend, she traveled to their home almost every weekend to take their picture, she says. She has almost no pictures of this other brother, Leonid. Here he is here. But this might be the only one. So where was he during all these photographic sessions? He's not that much older than these two. And the other interesting thing is most of her photos of when they were little, they're wearing this outfit here. It's just interesting to me because it doesn't really seem like she went to their place every weekend, but she certainly did know this family when they first arrived. Obviously, Carol Kitman was a significant person in the lives of Alexander Vindman and his twin brother. It says, last year, Kitman and her husband attended the Pentagon ceremony where Yevgeny, who also goes by Eugene, was promoted to the rank of lieutenant colonel. And this is November 2019. So the Kitmans are still close to the Vindmans. Carol Kitman wrote this book, One Mezuzah, a Jewish counting book. And check out the price. One used from $1,040. What's that all about? I checked other sources and there's wild prices for this thing. Even though on this, you can see, you can buy the paperback for $68. Maybe it's signed or something, I don't know. Her husband, Carol Kitman's husband, is a guy called Marvin Kitman, and he is rabidly anti-Trump. Apparently he has a radio show, or he did, and he writes this blog all the time. He's a pretty big deal, I guess, in certain circles. He has a whole bunch of pictures on his marvinkitman.com website. I guess this is him and his wife, although he oddly says an actress portraying Carol Kitman, and they're with Bob Batsha, president of the Museum of TV and Radio in 1998. Down here, it says he's with Howard Stringer, former president of CBS, at the famous Marvin Kitman's famous New School lectures. So he gave lectures at the New School. There's lots of pictures that indicate that this was not a one-time thing, and he knew a lot of muckety-mucks in that milieu. Just something to note, that these Jewish people, well entrenched in the entertainment world and also the progressive world of the Frankfurt School, latched on immediately somehow to these boys. Now, I'm interested to know more about this woman, and that's because I know that there were projects going on, we've talked about them before, where they specifically looked for certain kinds of kids, twins, for example, Lebensborn type kids, descendants of genetics, eugenics type programs to use for their purposes. This is a real thing. I'm not saying that the Vindman brothers were that. It's just that they kind of fit the profile, especially because their mother is gone. She apparently died. She disappeared. But even the father isn't around much in their youth either. They're always with this woman who looks honestly too old to be their grandmother. But I don't know, maybe she was. So, of course, when I'm looking for more information, I use her name. I don't find her first name anywhere. All I can find is Kalmanovich. That's all I've got to go on. So I look up Kalmanovich, and what do I find? I find this guy, Kalmanovich, Shabtai Kalmanovich, involved in super high-level fraud. This article, former Israeli double agent shot dead near Putin's office. This is in 2009. Shabtai Kalmanovich, former Israeli double agent who penetrated Golda Meir's government on behalf of the KGB, has been shot dead in Moscow. A figure with a colorful and checkered past, Kalmanovich and his Jewish family immigrated to Israel from Lithuania in 1971. After becoming an Israeli citizen, he joined the Israeli Labor Party, was appointed to a position in the government press office, and became a mole for the KGB. He later moved to the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, as an aide, and successfully forged close relations with several leading government figures, including the former Prime Minister Golda Meir. According to the CIA, Kalmanovich was responsible for passing on to Moscow sensitive American intelligence that Israel had acquired from Jonathan Pollard, an American national now serving life in prison for spying for Israel. Jonathan Pollard is now out of jail. He badly wants to go back to Israel. He's asked every president that there has been since he's been in jail to please repatriate him to Israel. And he has lots of people, powerful rabbis and Jewish activists, advocating for this on his behalf. So far, no dice. Trump has also said no. Right now, Jonathan Pollard is in a hotel an apartment under house arrest, I believe, in New York City. But Jonathan Pollard's really interesting because he comes up in connection to something we've talked about before, and something that has come up recently in relation to Jeffrey Epstein, and that is the Mega Group. From this LaRouche Pub, I think it's a LaRouche Pub thing, Executive Intelligence Review, Israeli spies, Mega was not an agent, Mega was the boss. And that's where we learn that there was an infestation of Israeli spies. And this involves stealing secrets from the Navy. He was in the Navy, Jonathan Pollard was, and he stole secrets, and he must have passed them on to Kalmanovich and the Israeli government, and probably the Russians also, if Kalmanovich was a double agent. So you see how deep this goes. Now, who was the Mega Group? The Mega Group was Les Wexner, two Bronfmans, Steven Spielberg, and a whole bunch of other guys. Whatever became of Shabtai Kalmanovich, Kalmanovich fled to Africa in the 1980s, becoming the proprietor of the only bus operating in Freetown, the capital of Sierra Leone, while continuing to spy for the KGB. That's funny. He actually was involved in much, much more than that in Sierra Leone, but we won't get into it in this video. He was later extradited to Israel, where he served 5 years in prison before being handed back to the Russians in 1993 as part of an intelligence deal. In Russia, Kalmanovich reinvented himself as an entrepreneur and man about town. Quickly making a multi-million-pound fortune, he brought Michael Jackson and Liza Minnelli to Moscow to stage massively popular concerts. And of course, he ended up being shot dead near Putin's office in 2009. And why am I bringing all this up again? I'm just bringing it up because, look at these faces. They're not that dissimilar. And all we know about Alexander Vindman's background, Alexander Vindman, the whistleblower on the National Security Council who started this whole impeachment debacle with Ukraine, well, that's supposedly the woman who raised him. And she shares a name with this Israeli double agent, massive fraudster. It's all just shady. So we have PBS and this Carol Kipman promoting this family out of nowhere. Why would this woman, it seems like this woman is important. She must have had connections maybe to these Jewish philanthropists running Project Ari, or the entertainment world, or the spy world, who knows? This brings us to the next guy, Murray Wilson. We're talking about him because he's an associate of Shabtai Kalmanovich. In this long Village Voice article from 1996 called The Last Jewish Gangster, we learn a lot about Murray Wilson. Sitting in a small office across Fifth Avenue from New York Public Library, Murray Wilson doesn't appear to be a world-class hoodlum, the shadowy link between New York's Russian and Italian mobs. Well, isn't that interesting? Murray Wilson is the link between New York's Russian and Italian mobs, and that's because he's the finance guy. He handles their money. And this article goes on to show how many frauds and bribery schemes and heists this guy was involved in. He even beat people up. He wasn't shy of violence, but he never got indicted. He never got charged. Why not? He put himself in the middle, just like George Soros likes to do. He put himself in the middle of all the high criminals. So if he got in trouble with one, the other one might have his back. He could also manage the tensions in between these two and the FBI, because apparently he had an open door policy with the FBI. Who knows what he told them? Probably a lot of misinformation. Maybe he handled the bribes to the FBI. We don't know, but he was not a good man. And here's the part that deals with Shabtai Kalmanovich. Through Balagula, that's another mobster, Wilson was also introduced to a shadowy criminal named Shabtai Kalmanovich, who, according to federal investigators, became a close business associate of Wilson's. He offered Russian mob contacts, including Balagula. So that's how these guys tie together. Months before Kalmanovich's bust, the spy was involved with Wilson in a counterfeit scheme to negotiate $12 million in phony Merrill Lynch checks. The FBI determined that Wilson and others were involved in arranging the counterfeit checks and carrying them to Kalmanovich in Europe. Hotel records show Wilson staying in the same hotel at the same time as Kalmanovich, while a search of the spy's room turned up, quote, an address book with Wilson's name, address, and phone numbers. There's no doubt Wilson was involved in this fraud. While Kalmanovich and partner William Davidson were hit with federal fraud charges, Wilson and Wattenstein, I don't know who that is, were never indicted. They never indicted him. The Merrill Lynch scam was detailed in papers filed by prosecutors during Wilson's Las Vegas mail and wire fraud prosecution. So there's another one. They also reveal Wilson was under investigation for passing $10,000 in bribes to New York State tax agent Anthony Tedeschi. So there's the bribes. Though the document stated Wilson is likely facing additional serious charges for the payoffs, he was never indicted. Again. And it goes on and on. It goes on and on and on. Here's something interesting that I'm going to talk about in another video. Law enforcement sources said Wilson was introduced to Tedeschi by notorious swindler Irwin Fatman Schiff. Schiff. Do you wonder? I tried to find a link between Schiff, the fat man, and Schiff, the impeachment man. Shifty Schiff. Can't verify anything, but it is an interesting coincidence that among these people, the name Schiff comes up. This is interesting because the Village Voice, who did that long expose of him in 1996, has an article here when he died in 2010. And by then they're saying, he was also generous and gregarious, a man who understood and honored the pillars of friendship and loyalty, no matter what side of the law you operated on. And New York is not as much fun tonight without him. Imagine the mainstream press openly honoring a guy who was corrupt through and through. Friends with murderers, beat people up himself, stole from the government, bribed tax officials, stole from the casinos, arranged to rip off the Sierra Leone government, dealt with KGB. Just the list of things this guy did is endless. And here they are honoring him. That's part of the big picture here. That's part of the story of how thoroughly corrupt everything is now. They're out in the open. They have no fear. And you have to wonder, are they related? Are these boys part of a system, a generational system of growing the next crop of people that they can count on to keep the corruption going? It looks like it to me. Okay, let's have a quick look at Leonid Vindman, the other brother that's never in any of these pictures. Leonid lives in Russia now. Rosie Memos at Almost Jingo on Twitter pointed out that the guy has a background in banking. That's what he mainly does, and he concentrates in Russia, Central Asia, etc. He worked for UniCredit Group and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Now, these are both really interesting because the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development is like the progressive agenda enforcer all around Europe, and George Soros works very closely with them. George Soros facilitates the changes that the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development wants to see in the societies of the countries it lends to. I just want to show you what I mean quickly about the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development being a predator on nations. Here's a report from them for 2002. And here's their section on Ukraine, their key reform challenges. One of them is to encourage greater restructuring and investment. The government should proceed as rapidly as market conditions allow with the sale of large-scale enterprises and utilities under transparent procedures. They want the countries to sell their utilities to the private sector. Gee, I wonder why. So that their oligarch buddies can go buy them up. People like George Soros, through his other vehicles, his other investment vehicles. You see, he says he's a philanthropist. He says he's interested in social change. Sure he is, because he wants to wrest a country's sovereign resources away from them and put them out on the open market. It's a racket. It's just as much of a racket as the mafia is. In fact, it's almost identical. And Leonid Vindman, worked for the bank. Now, the other thing there was UniCredit. And UniCredit just got found guilty for illegally processing transactions in violation of Iranian sanctions. Boom. April 15th, 2019. From 2002 to 2011. Vindman worked for them from 2007 to 2010. Was he directly involved with that? Who knows? But he was there at the time. What else about Leonid Vindman is interesting? As Rich Higgins here, at RichHiggins_DC, points out, Leonid is married to Maria Starkova. She went to Lomonosov Moscow State University, where a man named Joseph Misfud ran a project. Lomonosov Moscow State University. Misfud's London Academy of Diplomacy formed a partnership to exchange students and conduct joint research with them. Misfud, as you know, is key to the dossier. Remember the Trump dossier? The dossier which precipitated Spygate? That's Misfud. So, does Leonid Vindman's wife know Mifsud? Are they in on this? And how interesting that Mifsud is either Maltese or Italian. Mifsud, Russian university, Italian background. Vindman lives in Russia, brought over by Project Ari, maybe living in Brighton Beach with all the Russian immigrants near to this. That went on for decades. Here's an article, I don't know if this is him or not, from 1997. When the movie Titanic came out, they oddly just did a little piece about Russians paying big to watch Titanic. And they quote Leonid Vindman, a man on the street. Supply and demand, said Leonid Vindman, a 29-year-old bank employee, as he left the ticket window empty-handed the day after Titanic opened. So I guess he was in Moscow in 1997. Does he even... How long did he live in the States? Doesn't seem like he was there very long. His whole life is Russia, which is pretty weird because his brother's whole life is Ukraine. And doesn't Ukraine and Russia hate each other? What's going on here? What's going on here? Again, doesn't prove anything. It's just interesting. Let's move on to Simon Vindman, the dad. He looks quite a bit like his sons when they're grown up. And I tried to find more about it. Whatever happened to good old Simon Vindman? Where is he? Semyon Vindman. I did a newspapers.com search for him, for that name. There were two results for this name, both in the same area, both in New Jersey. And one was a house sale. The other was this: bus driver who let riders in luggage space is fired. New Jersey Transit bus driver has been fired for allowing passengers to ride in the underside luggage compartments, an agency spokesman confirmed yesterday. The incident happened on June 12th when two New Jersey Transit buses received passengers transferring from a ferry docking in Atlantic Highlands. The buses were scheduled to go to Monmouth Park directly from the ferry transfer, he said. The cruiser has 49 seats and there weren't enough seats for everybody, so they got in the underside luggage bays on one bus. That bus was being driven by Simon Vindman. The driver asked them to leave, but they refused. Apparently, the passengers in the bus insisted on traveling to the racetrack without delay. It was a very volatile situation. The driver made the decision to transport the passengers. Now, they fired him for this. So I don't know what the real story is, and I'm not suggesting, first of all, that this is actually the boy's father. I don't know. And I'm also not suggesting that he was up to no good. Perhaps these passengers overpowered him somehow, and he just decided to let them ride in the luggage bays to Monmouth Park racetrack from the ferry. Or perhaps this was part of something bigger. Because if you investigate what goes on in that area, or what did at the time, there was a lot of drug smuggling and drug selling. Here's an article from 1987 that says New Jersey is a major drug import center, and some interesting snippets from that article. According to some drug enforcement officers, several factors make New Jersey's drug problem unusual. The state's large containerized shipping business and its equally prominent chemical and pharmaceutical industries and secluded areas that make ideal locations for clandestine drug processing laboratories. With the closing of competing marine terminals in Brooklyn and Staten Island, New Jersey's ports in Newark, Elizabeth, Jersey City, and Perth Amboy now handle 90% of the commercial shipping in the New York, New Jersey metropolitan region. The port of Newark has become a focal point for most of the smuggling on the East Coast. Special Investigations Chief for the Monmouth County's Prosecutor's Office explained that crack was the drug people were buying at Asbury Park, Long Branch, and Monmouth Park racetracks. But also LSD was making something of a comeback in the streets of Monmouth County. Just to give you an idea, this is Brighton Beach. This is where the Russian immigrants collected, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Here's the Atlantic Highlands ferry docks, and here's the Monmouth Park racetrack. So here's where the bus would have picked them up, and a driver named Semyon Vindman. On Monday, the investigation was finished and Semyon Vindman, hired in 1988, was dismissed. Who knows what was going on there? I don't know what was going on there. But it just gave me the insight that the mafia, the mob, was operating in that area. A little more on Monmouth Park. Monmouth Park has steeplechase races. That's the betting on the horses. And when you look at the National Steeplechase Association, you see that a guy called Donald Yovanovitch has served as chairman of the NSA's Race Chairman's Committee. Yovanovitch. Now, Yovanovitch is one of the people involved in the impeachment inquiries. Normally, I wouldn't bring something like this up because it seems far too tenuous. We don't know if Marie Yovanovitch, impeachment witness, is related to this Donald Yovanovitch guy on the National Steeplechase Association. But someone else on the board with Donald Yovanovitch is William Gallo Jr. This name is very interesting. I thought to myself, where have I seen this name before? And it's because of the research into the mafia. William Gallo Sr. comes up in relation to the Genovese crime family. Here it says William Gallo is a henchman of Bacchia, some other mobster guy. And here's the pièce de résistance, and the reason I decided to include this at all. Look at this notice from 1986. Catherine Gallo is wed to Anthony CIA Ramella. Again, I know that's not how it's pronounced, but YouTube will delete the video if I say it right. We know that that is the name of the unnamed whistleblower's father. At least that's what we're told. And Catherine Gallo is the daughter of William Gallo Jr., who is on the board of the National Steeplechase Association with Donald Yovanovitch, who may or may not be related to Ambassador Yovanovitch. That's why I'm bringing this up. Now it might be more clear why I included this guy, Eric CIA Ramella, so close to the picture of the mafia. He might be the grandson of a mafia henchman in the Gallo family related to the Genoveses. And that's a whole other video, which is coming. But for now, let's go on to the next subject. All right, so I told you Brighton Beach area is where the Russian immigrants went to live. And I told you I was going to talk about Project Ari. Well, here we go. Philanthropy's Project Ari helps Russian immigrants settle. This is an article from 1976, and it talks about approximately 11,000 Russian Jews have begun new lives in the United States. Nearly 6,000 of these have settled in New York City. Project Ari stands for Action for Russian Immigrants, and it's very strongly Jewish. It is a Jewish organization. Over here, you'll see that it talks about all of its programs for Jewish youth, adults, and children. By 1989, we learned that the Brighton Beach section of Brooklyn, where some 30,000 Soviets have settled since the 1970s. And then by 1994, immigrants admitted from the former Soviet republics alone went from 11,000 in 1989 to 58,500 in 1993. In Brighton Beach, a boardwalk community of up to 60,000 Russian immigrants, Niet is more common than no on the streets, and many stores use the Cyrillic alphabet. Russians in Brighton Beach have become so identified with crime, particularly the organized kind, that established immigrants in New York area formed a group to protect Russian speakers from discrimination. Some newcomers are cheating everyone from IRS to friends. They wouldn't obey the rules. They are destroyed from the inside. So this was a group of older Russian immigrants getting together to defend themselves from the newer Russian immigrants who were coming over and getting straight into organized crime. And they would have been welcomed and groomed by this Project Ari. So yeah, Russian organized crime was thriving. And there were 60,000 of them in the Brighton Beach area alone. 60,000 of them right here. So you can see why I focused on Monmouth Park and why I wonder about this route here with the ports, with immigration, with drugs. And then with this guy kicking around. Don't forget about him, Murray Wilson, the Jewish connection that links the two mafias, the Russian mafia and the Italian mafia in New York. He also worked for a Russian Jew resettlement program in New York. Wilson said that he met most of the men through the work he performed with Bris Avraham, an organization that helps settle newly arrived Russian Jews. Some may have turned out bad, he said, but the majority turned out to be very nice citizens. And that very well may be true. But Murray Wilson was in the business of the mafia. The Russian mafia. It talks about him using that article that I read earlier, talks about him using them for his own scams in Las Vegas and things like that. And then he just throws them under the bus, lets them get arrested while he skates off. This is a very predatory situation. And you've got to wonder if that wasn't maybe the whole point of Project Ari in the first place. That's the type of high-level scumbag crime that this guy did. One of the men that Wilson knew was Evsei Agron. Evsei Agron was called the godfather of the Russian-American mafia. He came to the United States in 1975 under this Jackson-Vanik Amendment, which liberalized the immigration between the countries. He swiftly gained control of criminal operations among the Soviet Jews living in Brighton Beach. The Soviet Jews living in Brighton Beach, who were brought there by Project Ari, and maybe Briss Avraham. Agron organized a motor fuel racket which would earn millions, if not billions, through fuel tax fraud. This type of fraud, which involved selling tax-free home heating oil as diesel fuel, eventually cost the state of New Jersey alone an estimated $1 billion annually in lost tax revenues. And Wilson was a pal of this guy. In April 1983, Agron and a large contingent of Russians accompanied Wilson on a Passover junket to Las Vegas Dunes Hotel. These immigrants were there to assist Wilson in a $1 million heist from the hotel casino. This Wilson guy just got up to crime his whole life using the Italian mob and the Russian mob. And he was involved in the organization that was bringing more and more people that he could use into that one area of New York. And he was never indicted. And he died as a bon vivant, celebrated by the locals in the paper. So corrupt. The whole system. Do you realize how many other lawyers, how many judges, how many prosecutors, how many FBI agents, CIA agents, district attorneys, tax people? Do you realize how many people have to be corrupt for a guy like Wilson to get away with that his whole life? It's unbelievable. And now you see why you've got seemingly respectable people in seemingly respectable jobs coming after the president. You see why they will bold-face lie. They are all deeply corrupt, and some of them probably were literally brought to the United States and educated and trained specifically in this type of fraud, into a whole way of thinking where they don't even maybe fully understand that it is fraud. That's my hypothesis anyway. What else have I got for you? Yes, just to let you know, it's not over. It's not over. Mob New Jersey, the mafia is still here, tied to Port Newark and the suburbs. This is from September 29th, 2019. They talked to a guy who works on the ports there. It has never stopped, O'Malley said, and it will continue as long as there are ships that are coming in from all over the world, and people here know what the ships are bringing in. This is why they want to ship goods all over the world instead of having us produce them locally at home. It's part of the reason. They only have to control the ports. They can hide anything in these shipping containers. Drugs, people, bombs, guns, you name it. Aerodynamic, I keep mentioning this. So Project Aerodynamic was established in 1953 to conduct the clandestine activities of the ZPUHVR, which is the foreign representation of the Ukrainian Supreme Liberation Council via the Prologue Research and Publishing Association in New York, New York. Here's a map. Here's the Prologue offices, which is a CIA front organization. Project Ari immigrants are all down here, 60,000 of them, in Brighton Beach. And here's the ports, here's one of the racetracks, here's the ferry across. That's where Semyon Vindman lived and worked. Don't know for sure if that's the same Semyon Vindman, but we do know the Vindmans lived in that Brighton Beach general area growing up. And isn't it stunning, actually, that the CIA was running a program in the United States to support the foreign representation of the Ukrainian Supreme Liberation Council? What is that all about? Supposedly it was to undermine Russia inside the area that is now Ukraine. I don't know what business the CIA really had doing this, and on the taxpayers' dime, bringing in all of these immigrants so that they could mold them into a voting bloc And they talk about this in the aerodynamic papers, that they can mold these immigrants because they're kind of helpless, because they don't speak the language, because they're culturally fish out of water. If you don't assimilate them, you can get them to work towards political ends. I don't know if they expected people like Murray Wilson to come along and scoop them up and make them the mafia. Maybe they did expect that, because they didn't break it up, did they? They let Murray Wilson get away with it forever. They let this gas tax thing with FC Agron cost the taxpayers billions. And what happens in a city when the mafia is siphoning off billions of dollars in tax revenue? The people suffer. The tax-paying, hard-working citizens of that area suffer. For the sake of the mafia, for the sake of wanting regime change in the Ukraine, this is wrong. It's so wrong. But a lot of people are making a lot of money, and that's why we've got impeachment now, in my opinion. Now, this I put in here because it kind of demonstrates what we're going through right now with impeachment and the whole circus of people who want to get rid of Trump, the Trump derangement syndrome. This, to me, kind of is a little mini example of it here. In 1966, a professor called Lev Dobryansky, he figured it out. He figured out what was going on with the Project Aerodynamic and this Prologue Research Center. He wrote a letter to the FBI saying the CIA is running an operation out of New York using emigres, using they've set up this Prologue guy who's trying to undermine the Ukraine. By the way, this Dobryansky was totally anti-communist. He didn't want visas. He didn't want travel back and forth to Russia. He said it's really bad news. Really bad news. So he was trying to blow the whistle back then for real on a CIA operation that he felt was very dangerous. He was a professor. His whole life was he escaped the communists and he came to the United States, and he was very anti-communist. What happened? They shut him down. And how did they shut him down? The people running the operation replied, and they said, Dr. Dobryansky is out to smear not only the CIA, but also the foreign representation of the Supreme Ukrainian Liberation Council, whose secretary, Mykola Lebed, is president of Prologue Research. Prologue has criticized Mr. Dobryansky for his involvement with American right-wing political factions. Dr. Dobryansky said, "You're doing more harm than good, and you appear to be pro-communist, pro-Soviet." And they came back and they just said, "You're a liar who hangs out with right-wing activist groups." It sounds very much like today to me. Projection. They're accusing the other side of doing what they are doing. And remember, this letter mentioned Mykola Lebed. Mykola Lebed was, you would call him a rebel, I guess, over in Ukraine. He had to leave because obviously he was an agitator to the government. So he left and he became an asset of the CIA, and he set up this Prologue research group under Project Aerodynamic. Here is the Atlantic Council. This is from 2015, remembering Roman Kupczynski. He was a contemporary of Mykola Lebed, and he worked for Prologue Research Corp. Then he became a full-fledged CIA officer. Kupczynski worked to keep up a steady stream of publication and books on Ukraine, interacting with dissidents, and supporting attempts to undermine the Soviet regime. After he became president of the organization in 1981, Prologue expanded, opening an office in London and widening its focus, sending material to Russia and other Eastern Bloc nations. After leaving Prologue in 1990, Kupczynski joined Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Liberty, and thanks to his reputation in the Ukraine, he was able to set up an RFE-RL bureau in Kiev by 1994. He cultivated a generation of Ukrainian journalists. He was a think tank by himself. Oh, was he? Was he? You know who else was active in Ukraine at that very same time? Was George Soros. I did a whole video on it. You can go back and look at it. It's a full-scale gutting and then restructuring of economies, whole countries, their social fabric, the way the people study, the way the people work, who gets taxes, who owns the resources, where the resources go, how much the people pay for the resources, where people can live, the types of housing they have, and mostly the news. They control the message so that we don't understand what's happening, and we can never quite understand how they never get anything right, how no matter how hard they try, how no matter who we vote in, it always ends up that we get the short end of the stick. Things always seem to go from bad to worse. It's because of this deep, generational, planned corruption, basically turning everything into the same racket that this Evsey Agron ran. Everything's this kind of racket now, skimming. This is what it all looks like at the end, and it's huge and confusing. But I just want to remind you quickly that what we looked at was the way the mafia is actually handy for full-time fraudsters like this guy, Murray Wilson, who got himself in between the Russian and the Italian mobs. He worked for both of them, and he played them off of one another. He also supposedly was talking to the FBI all the time. Why did he never go to jail? Why, when he died, did the Village Voice say that New York is poorer without him? Now, the other thing was all these philanthropy projects that sought purposely to bring large immigrant communities into one geographical area and then use them to build up mafia-type scams. And perhaps this woman, Kalmanovich, perhaps she was involved with it. Or perhaps Carol Kitman, the photographer of the Vindman family, perhaps she was involved with it. Isn't it just a little too coincidental that there's an album of them from the time they were children, and they also got chosen to be on Ken Burns's PBS movie about migration? But this family was groomed, you can tell, maybe for this very moment of impeachment. The brothers certainly went on to be quite useful to the oligarchs. Leonid, working for the European Bank, which helps reshape the economies of countries that people like Soros want to change. His wife is Russian, went to the same university where the Spygate dossier creator, Joseph Mifsud, works and does a student exchange. He also worked at UniCredit Bank, which facilitated the avoidance of sanctions against Iran. Imagine that. And Vindman, of course, is now the one trying to nail Jell-O to the wall in this impeachment fiasco. And he links us to a guy, Eric CIA Ramella, who seems to have an Italian background and, from what I could find, might have some relatives over here in the mafia in New York. But we know that Eric CIA Ramella was a CIA officer. And we know that the CIA ran Project Aerodynamic and Prologue out of New York City, where they depended heavily on the people who came over in projects such as Project Airy, these Eastern European, Russian, Ukrainian migrants. That's who they focused everything on. And the Atlantic Council took advantage and memorializes greatly the people who worked for Prologue, because these people did eventually win Ukraine its independence. And when Ukraine got its independence, that freed up all the natural resources for the oligarchs to buy. One of those resource companies was Burisma. That's Hunter Biden and Joe Biden are involved in Burisma. And that's fuel. And that's a tax avoidance scheme or a money skimming scheme, just like the mafia did in New York and New Jersey. Now, Vindman's grandmother has the same last name as a massive fraudster, double agent, billionaire who ended up being shot to death in Russia in 2009. A double agent for Israel and the KGB, as so we hear. He is supposedly linked directly to Jonathan Pollard. Jonathan Pollard worked for the Navy. He sold secrets back to Israel. And if he was giving them to this guy, he might have been giving them to Russia as well. And the funny thing is about Jonathan Pollard is he comes up in relation to the mega group. And the mega group is a group of Jewish influential millionaires and billionaires from the United States. One of them is Les Wexner, and Les Wexner had as his right-hand man a guy called Jeffrey Epstein. Remember that? It's quite a tangled web. And it involves so many agencies. It involves so many judges, so many politicians, so many foundations, so many pillars of the community, so-called. It's difficult to wrap your mind around it. Well, I'm going to stop talking now. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, could you leave me a thumbs up and a comment? I love to get your comments. And the thumbs up help the algorithm. Also, I'm going to leave my paypal.me information in the description box. If you'd like to send a financial contribution, I would be forever in your debt. One of these days, I'm going to have to do a short video just showing some of the things I've gotten in the regular snail mail. It's incredible. Thank you to the people. I am going to do that, so I won't go through and thank you now, but if you want to send me something through the snail mail, whether it be financial or little gift or just a note, just a card, I read all of them. I love getting them. It's like Christmas. You can find my address on my website, amazingpolly.net, on the contact page. What else can I tell you? I'm on BitChute, and you can find me there. That's a backup because YouTube's going crazy. I'm on Twitter. I will leave all this stuff in the description box along with a ton of references for the information that I brought to you today. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you have a great night. Until next time, peace out.